Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Emily Johnson was 14 years old, and her life seemed ordinary. A studious, shy, but curious high school student, she lived in a quiet, small American town where everyone knew each other. Her days were punctuated by school, homework, and the occasional outing with friends. But behind her discreet smile hid a secret she dared not confide in anyone. A secret growing inside her, silent, disturbing. Emily knew that if her parents or friends discovered the truth, their world would be turned upside down. Then one day, the secret became impossible to hide. Strange pains, constant nausea, and intense fatigue had driven her to the doctor. The news that followed sent Emily's world into a frozen silence. She was pregnant. At just 14 years old. Fear, shame, and incomprehension flooded his thoughts. How could this have happened? And most importantly, what would happen now? What Emily and her family would discover during childbirth would be beyond anything they could have imagined, something frightening, unique, and completely unexpected. Emily Johnson didn't understand what was happening to her. For several weeks, she had felt exhausted, sick, and her nausea seemed to never end. Her worried parents took her to the doctor, thinking she had the flu or some kind of infection. But the verdict was terrifying: Emily was pregnant. At 14 years old. The news hit her family like a thunderclap. Her mother, Linda, collapsed on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. Her father, David, stood frozen, unable to speak, his gaze fixed on his daughter, torn between anger, fear, and despair. Emily felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Her eyes filled with tears, which she tried to hold back. How is this possible?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Fear of what the community, school, friends would say, all of this assailed her. She felt alone, betrayed by her own body, and paralyzed by shame. Her parents, despite their anger and shock, made an immediate decision: to protect their daughter at all costs. They would face this situation together, despite everyone's judgment. But what Emily didn't know was that the real ordeal had yet to begin. Because during childbirth, an even more frightening and unexpected secret was about to be revealed. The days following the announcement were a nightmare for Emily. Every morning, looking in the mirror, she saw a teenager who looked ordinary, but whose body carried a secret that no one should know. Shame gnawed at her, and she avoided the gaze of her classmates as if a simple smile could betray her situation. At school, Emily felt like an outsider among her friends. She was afraid that a word she said, a detail she had been hiding for weeks, would reveal. Even her best friends seemed to be becoming strangers, and she was slowly isolating herself. At home, the tension was palpable. Her mother, Linda, didn't know how to comfort her daughter without showing concern. Her father, David, made frequent doctor visits and looked for solutions to ensure his daughter's safety. The small family lived in a fragile bubble, aware that the outside world would not be kind. Emily asked herself 1,000 questions. How will I hold out? How will I cope with childbirth? What if something terrible happens to my baby? Her fear was not only for herself, but also for the child she was carrying, this little being about whom she knew almost nothing. Every night, she cried silently in her room, her stomach tightening with pain that was a constant reminder of the reality of her pregnancy. But despite the fear and shame, a small glimmer of courage began to emerge within her. Emily knew she had to hold on, not only for herself, but also for the one who would soon come into the world. And as the due date approached, a deeper worry grew in the family's hearts, that of an even more frightening secret that awaited them at the birth. As the weeks passed, Emily's pregnancy became increasingly difficult to hide. Her parents made appointments with specialists to ensure everything went smoothly. The doctor warned them, at her age, a pregnancy was high risk. They had to monitor every detail, every movement, every heartbeat. Emily, though scared, did her best to stay strong. She attended doctor's appointments with her mother, tentatively asking questions, trying to understand what was happening to her body. She knew she had no choice, she had to prepare for the inevitable, even though the thought of giving birth at 14 terrified her. The tests continued. Each ultrasound seemed to reveal something normal, but the doctors remained cautious. A slightly atypical mass had been noticed, but nothing could be said for sure yet. Emily felt a dull worry, something wasn't quite as expected. At home, the family was setting up the room where the child would be born. Small furniture, soft blankets, nightlights, everything was ready. Linda tried to transform anxiety into tenderness, but her gaze betrayed fear. David, on the other hand, was protective, checking that the house was safe and that their daughter would have everything she needed. Emily found herself dreaming about her baby sometimes. She imagined a small, innocent face, a fragile breath of life that she would have to protect at all costs. But deep down, a worrying feeling persisted. What if her child wasn't what she'd hoped? The due date was approaching, and with it, the tension mounted to a fever pitch. The doctors, attentive, advised hospitalization close to the due date, ready to intervene at any moment. Emily, frightened but courageous, knew she had to face the unknown, what would be revealed during this birth, a frightening secret that no one could have imagined. One rainy morning, Emily felt the first contractions. They were fast and painful, hitting her young body with an intensity she had never known. Her mother, Linda, helped her up, while David called the hospital urgently. The family quickly arrived at the hospital, their hands shaking and their hearts pounding. Emily was taken to a delivery room, where the white lights and the noise of machines amplified her fear. She clutched her mother's hand, while her father stood back, watching with deep concern. The contractions were intensifying, and Emily, despite her young age, showed impressive strength. She followed the midwife's advice, breathing deeply and trying to stay focused. But her mind kept going back to what the doctor had said: this pregnancy was risky. Every beat of her baby's heart was a battle. The minutes seemed like hours. Emily felt her body giving in to the pain, but she refused to panic. Her family, at her side, supported her, whispering encouragement and wiping away her tears. Then came the critical moment. The doctor, intent on the portable ultrasound screen, frowned. Something was wrong. The heartbeat was irregular, and a strange shape appeared on the screen. The medical team exchanged quick glances, sensing that this birth would not be like any other. Emily, unaware of the gravity of the situation, prepared to push. But the tension in the room was palpable, every breath, every movement, every second counted. Fear and anxiety mingled in a heavy silence, before the moment of revelation struck. Emily gave one last push, panting and trembling. The midwives and doctor held their breath. Then, finally, the baby appeared, but what met them was far from what they had imagined. The infant did not appear entirely human. A rare, almost inhuman malformation marked his face and body. The skin appeared translucent in places, revealing faint red patterns that ran like tiny veins. The eyes, large and black, stared around the room with a disturbing intensity. The limbs, slightly disproportionate, gave the impression of extreme fragility. Linda let out a muffled cry and curled up in a ball. David, unable to look away, felt a mixture of fear, disbelief, and panic. Emily, exhausted and trembling, wept without understanding what she was seeing. Everything she had imagined for her child seemed to vanish in an icy breath. The doctors exchanged quick whispers, carefully assessing the situation. They immediately placed the baby under a special lamp to monitor his health, reassuring Emily, "He'll survive, but he'll need intensive care." Despite the fear and shock, a strange feeling emerged: this little being, though different and frightening, was alive. Every breath he took reminded Emily and her family that, even in the unexpected, there was a force worth protecting. This birth marked the beginning of a struggle. Not only for the baby's survival, but also to come to terms with a secret that would turn their lives and those of the community upside down. News of Emily's extraordinary birth spread quickly, first at the hospital, then throughout the small town. Rumors, often distorted, circulated like wildfire. Some spoke of a monstrous baby, others of a miracle child. The Johnson family immediately felt the weight of judgment. The curious or contemptuous stares multiplied. Neighbors avoided their house, and some whispered in the street, unable to comprehend what they had seen. Emily felt her heart clench every time she went outside, fearing she might encounter a hostile or mocking face. For Emily, the shame was no longer just about her past pregnancy, but about her child's difference. Every gesture, every expression of her baby seemed to attract attention and whispers. Yet, in the silence of her room, Emily discovered a strange feeling, an unconditional love for this little being, despite his difference and the fear he inspired. The doctors, for their part, remained cautious but reassuring. They had seen rare and frightening cases, but the baby's health remained their top priority. Constant care was necessary, and the family was forced to follow a strict protocol to protect the child. Despite the fear and isolation, Emily and her parents began to grow closer. They knew they had to face the world together and protect this fragile miracle from misunderstanding and judgment. And little by little, Emily understood a fundamental truth: strength did not come from the looks of others, but from the love and courage of those who stood by her side. As the weeks passed, the Johnson family began to learn to live with this new reality. Hospital visits were frequent, each doctor's appointment bringing its share of worries, but also small victories. The baby was breathing well, her vital functions were improving, and each fragile smile inspired a little more courage in Emily. Emily began to touch and hold her child for brief moments. Despite the baby's different appearance, she felt a deep connection. Every breath, every tiny movement, every heartbeat seemed to whisper to her that she must be strong. Fear and shame slowly gave way to unconditional love. At home, Linda and David turned their concern into action. They created a safe and comfortable space for the child, following the doctor's instructions to the letter. Every action, every care, became a ritual of love and protection. Emily learned to change diapers, rock the baby, and speak softly to this fragile being who depended entirely on her. Gradually, the family realized that the child wasn't a burden, but a miracle in his own way. This baby, so different and fragile, had taught them a lesson in strength and resilience. Emily even began to imagine a future for him, determined to protect him from the gaze of others and give him all the love he deserved. Society's fear didn't completely disappear, but it became secondary to the absolute priority: the child's survival and well-being. Emily discovered that accepting the unexpected and loving despite differences was a mother's true strength, even though she was still only a teenager. Despite the protection and love of her family, Emily knew the outside world would remain unforgiving. The whispers, the curious, and sometimes mocking looks never completely stopped. But instead of giving in to fear, Emily decided to turn this situation into strength. She began sharing her experience with young people her own age in anonymous meetings and support groups. She recounted the fear, shame, and anguish, but also the love and determination she had discovered within herself. Her story inspired those who felt alone or misunderstood, showing that courage does not depend on age, but on the will to protect what is precious. At home, every day brought new challenges: intensive medical care, short nights, constant worry about the baby's health. But Emily learned to transform worry into vigilance and anxiety into responsibility. Every smile from the baby, every small medical advancement, was a victory that strengthened her confidence and courage. Her parents, impressed by their daughter's maturity, realized that the experience had shaped Emily into an exceptionally strong teenager. David and Linda understood that protecting their child now required supporting Emily in her role as a mother. Together, they formed a bulwark against judgment and fear, and each challenge strengthened the family bond. Emily understood a crucial truth: facing fear and the unknown with courage and love could transform a frightening situation into a life lesson. And she would pass this lesson on to her child, who would grow up surrounded by strength, resilience, and protection, despite his difference. As the months passed, the baby grew, fragile but alive, supported by the love and vigilance of Emily and her parents. Each day brought its share of small victories: a first smile, a strong breath, an unexpected movement. These moments strengthened the family's unity and their determination to face the outside world. Emily began to dream about the future, despite her young age. She wanted to return to school, continue her education, and create a safe environment for her child. Her parents encouraged her, reminding her that their baby's difference should never be a hindrance, but a source of strength and pride. In the community, some neighbors began to change their outlook. Those who had criticized or shunned the family were surprised by the tenacity and love Emily and her parents displayed. The story of their courage spread as an example of resilience in the face of the unexpected. Emily understood that her role was not only to protect her child, but also to show him the beauty of acceptance and difference. She began to dream of a world where her child could grow up without fear of judgment, surrounded by love and understanding. Despite the challenges still ahead, the Johnson family discovered that life, even after a frightening and unexpected shock, could offer bright and unexpected horizons. The future, though uncertain, was now filled with hope and possibility. Over time, Emily and her family learned to transform fear and shame into love and pride. The baby, fragile but alive, became the center of their world, a symbol of resilience and courage. Every medical advance, every smile, every tiny cry was a victory over the unexpected. Emily, now more confident, gradually resumed her teenage life. School, friends, and dreams of the future returned, but she knew that nothing would ever be exactly the same. She now carried the responsibility of a unique and special person, and she assumed it with maturity and courage. The community, touched by the family's tenacity and love, began to look at them differently. Murmurs turned to respect, and some neighbors offered their support. Emily realized that the fear of judgment was often greater than the judgment itself, and that true strength came from within. Watching her child sleep, Emily felt a deep serenity. She knew that, despite the different appearance and the challenges she faced, her baby had a place in this world, surrounded by love and protection. The lesson was clear: even in the most frightening and unexpected situations, love, courage, and resilience could triumph. Emily and her family had survived the unimaginable, and now they could look to the future with hope. Their lives had changed forever, but the bond they shared had become indestructible, stronger than society's fear and judgment.